The iron shackles had already worn through the skin at her wrists when Cassandra Nelson first heard the rider approaching through the canyon. And she had stopped screaming for help 3 days ago when her throat turned raw as sandpaper. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the abandoned trading post where Dutch Carver's gang had left her chained to the wagon wheel, promising they would return after they finished their business in Tucson, though she knew in her heart they had no intention of keeping that promise. She was 22 years old, the daughter of a failed banker from St. Louis, and she had made the catastrophic mistake of trusting the wrong man at the wrong saloon in the wrong dusty corner of the Arizona Territory in the summer of 1881. The rider came closer, his horse's hooves crunching over the dried earth and scattered rocks, and Cassandra lifted her head with what little strength remained in her dehydrated body. Through the shimmering heat waves rising from the desert floor, she could make out the silhouette of a man on horseback, tall in the saddle, wearing the wide-brimmed hat and dusty trail clothes of someone who lived more under open sky than under any roof. She tried to call out, but only a hoarse whisper escaped her cracked lips. Lucas Mitchell reined in his buckskin gelding when he spotted the overturned wagon and the huddled figure chained to its wheel. At 25, he had been riding the territory for 7 years, working cattle drives, breaking horses, and occasionally taking bounty work when the money ran thin. He had seen plenty of harsh things in his time, but the sight of a woman left to die in the desert sun made his jaw tighten with a cold fury that settled deep in his chest. He dismounted in one fluid motion and approached cautiously, his hand instinctively resting on the revolver at his hip until he was certain this was not some elaborate trap. "Easy now," he said softly as he knelt beside her, his shadow falling across her sunburned face like a blessing. "I have got you." Cassandra's eyes fluttered open, and she found herself staring into the most striking blue eyes she had ever seen, set in a face weathered by sun and wind but undeniably handsome beneath the dust and stubble. "Water," she managed to whisper. Lucas uncapped his canteen and held it carefully to her lips, letting her drink slowly so she would not make herself sick. "Not too fast," he cautioned, his voice gentle despite the anger still simmering beneath the surface at whoever had done this to her. When she had drunk her fill, he examined the chains binding her to the wagon wheel, thick iron links secured with a heavy padlock that had already rusted in places from the desert air. "Who did this?" he asked, though his primary concern was getting her free first and asking questions later. "Carver's gang," she said, her voice still weak but growing stronger with each word. "Dutch Carver. I was traveling with them because I had no other choice after my father died in Tucson. I thought they would take me to California where my aunt lives in Angel's Camp. Instead, they robbed me of what little money I had and left me here to die." Lucas felt that cold fury deepen into something darker. He knew of Dutch Carver, a vicious outlaw who ran a gang of thieves and murderers through the Arizona Territory and into New Mexico. "I am going to get these chains off you," he said with quiet determination. He studied the lock carefully, then pulled a small leather kit from his saddlebag and began working on it with practiced fingers. He had learned to pick locks during a brief and regrettable period working for a less than reputable horse trader, but the skill came in useful now. The lock resisted his efforts, the mechanism damaged by rust and heat. After 10 minutes of careful work with no success, Lucas sat back on his heels and considered the problem from a different angle. "This lock is not going to open," he said finally. "The mechanism is damaged. I am going to have to break the chains themselves." He retrieved a hatchet from his saddle and examined the links where they wrapped around the wagon wheel. The iron was old and rust weakened in places, and he positioned the hatchet carefully against the weakest link he could find. "Cover your face," he instructed, and when she had turned away, he brought the hatchet down with all his strength. Sparks flew, and the impact rang out across the empty desert, but the chain held. He struck again and again, each blow sending reverberations through the metal and the wood. On the fifth strike, the link cracked but did not break. Lucas wiped the sweat from his brow and adjusted his angle, striking at the same spot with increased force. The chain cracked further, and on the seventh blow, the link finally shattered, fragments of rusted iron scattering across the ground. But the chain still held her, wrapped around both wrists and threaded through the spokes of the wagon wheel in a cruel configuration that prevented her from simply sliding free. "We need to burn through the rest," Lucas said, already gathering dried brush and the splintered remains of the wagon's broken sideboards. Cassandra watched him work, fascinated by the efficiency of his movements, the quiet competence that spoke of a man accustomed to solving problems in harsh environments. He built a small fire carefully, banking it with rocks to contain the flames, then fed the broken chain links into the hottest part of the blaze. "This is going to take time," he said, settling down beside her to wait. "The metal needs to get hot enough to weaken. Tell me about Angel's camp." "Is your aunt expecting you?" Cassandra shook her head, wincing at the pain in her neck from 3 days spent in one position. "My father and I left St. Louis 4 months ago after his bank failed. We were trying to start over, but he caught fever in Tucson and died within a week. I had a letter from my aunt, years old, saying I could come to her if I ever needed help. It was all I had left." "My parents died of fever too," Lucas said quietly, watching the flames lick at the iron. 10 years ago in Kansas, I was 15, been on my own ever since." He paused, then added, "I am sorry about your father." She looked at him properly for the first time, seeing past the trail dust and sun-weathered skin to the kind eyes and the gentle way he had given her water, the careful attention he paid to making sure she was comfortable while they waited for the fire to do its work. "Thank you," she said softly. "For stopping, for not just riding past." "Could not do that," he replied simply, as if the choice had never really been a choice at all. "No decent person could." They sat in companionable silence while the fire burned, and Lucas periodically checked the chains, testing their strength as the metal heated and began to glow dull red in places. After nearly an hour, he used a stick to pull one section of chain from the flames and tested it carefully with the hatchet. The heated metal gave way more easily, and he worked quickly, breaking link after link until finally, the chains fell away from her wrists entirely, reduced to fragments and ash. Cassandra cried out in relief and pain as circulation returned to her hands, the sensation agonizing after days bound in the same position. Lucas caught her before she collapsed, his strong arms supporting her weight as if she weighed nothing at all. "I have got you," he said again, and this time she believed it completely. He carried her to the shade of a scraggly mesquite tree and carefully examined her wrists, which were raw and bleeding from the metal. "This is going to hurt," he warned before cleaning the wounds with water from his canteen and binding them with strips torn from his spare shirt. His hands were surprisingly gentle for someone so clearly accustomed to hard living, and Cassandra found herself studying his face as he worked, noting the concentration in his expression, the firm line of his jaw, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar beneath the brim of his hat. "Where were you headed?" she asked. "Before you found me." "Nowhere in particular," Lucas admitted, finishing the bandaging. "I had been working a cattle drive from Texas up to the railhead in New Mexico, got my pay, and was just drifting west." Thought I might try California, see if the stories about it are true." He looked at her thoughtfully. "Angel's Camp is in California, up in the Gold Country. I could take you there if you want. Make sure you get to your aunt safely." Cassandra felt her heart skip strangely in her chest, though she told herself it was merely relief and gratitude, nothing more. "I have no money to pay you," she said honestly. "Carver took everything." "Did not ask for payment," Lucas replied, his blue eyes meeting hers steadily. "Just offering to help." She nodded slowly, overwhelmed by his kindness after the cruelty she had endured. "Then yes, please, I would be grateful." Lucas helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her, his arms coming around to hold the reins. Cassandra leaned back against his chest, too exhausted to maintain her own balance, and felt the steady strength of him supporting her. They rode away from that terrible place as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. That night, Lucas made camp in a small canyon where a trickle of water still ran despite the summer heat. He spread his bedroll for Cassandra and took only his saddle blanket for himself, insisting she needed proper rest more than he did. He cooked beans and jerky into a simple stew, and Cassandra ate ravenously, her body desperate for sustenance after days without food. "Tell me about what you did before all this," Lucas said, feeding small sticks into the campfire. "In St. Louis." "I helped my father at the bank," Cassandra said, wrapping her hands around the warm tin cup of coffee he had given her. "I kept the books, wrote correspondence, dealt with clients when he was busy. It was not traditional work for a woman, but after my mother died when I was 16, it was just the two of us. He taught me everything he knew about finance and business." She smiled sadly. For all the good it did. He made some bad investments, trusted the wrong partners, and lost everything. "We left St. Louis in shame." "That takes courage," Lucas observed, "starting over in a new place." "Or desperation," she said wryly, then added more seriously, "What about you? Have you always been a cowboy?" Lucas smiled, a rare expression that transformed his weathered face. "I have been a lot of things. Cowhand, horsebreaker, ranch foreman for a season, even did some work for the army as a scout. I am good with horses and I know the land. That has been enough to keep me fed and clothed." He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward into the night sky. "But I am 25 now. Starting to think maybe I should find something more permanent, a place to settle, land of my own, that sort of thing." They talked late into the night, conversation flowing easily despite their vastly different backgrounds. Cassandra found herself laughing for the first time in months at Lucas's stories about stubborn horses and ornery cattle, and Lucas discovered that he enjoyed making her laugh, liked the way her whole face lit up when she smiled. When she finally fell asleep, warm and safe for the first time since her father died, Lucas sat watch through the night, his hand resting on his rifle across his knees, determined that no harm would come to her while she was under his protection. They traveled westward for 2 weeks, taking their time through the Arizona Territory and into California, moving slowly so Cassandra could regain her strength. Lucas proved to be an excellent traveling companion, patient and thoughtful, always making sure she was comfortable and had enough to eat. He taught her how to shoot his spare revolver, insisting that she needed to know how to protect herself, and he smiled with genuine pride when she hit her first target, an old tin can balanced on a rock. "You are a natural," he said, and Cassandra felt absurdly pleased by the compliment. They stopped in small towns along the way, and Lucas spent some of his carefully hoarded wages on proper supplies for her, a bedroll of her own, new clothes to replace the torn and filthy dress she had been wearing, boots that actually fit. Cassandra protested the expense, but Lucas waved away her objections with quiet stubbornness. "You need these things," he said simply. "I have got the money, and I want to spend it this way." In a town called Ehrenberg along the Colorado River, they stayed at a small boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, who took one look at Cassandra's healing wrists and Lucas's protective posture and drew her own conclusions about their relationship. She gave them separate rooms but made pointed comments about what a fine couple they made, how lucky Cassandra was to have such a devoted husband looking after her. Cassandra blushed furiously and started to correct the misunderstanding, but Lucas just smiled his rare smile and thanked Mrs. Patterson for the comfortable rooms. Later, as they sat on the boarding house porch watching the sun set over the river, Cassandra brought it up. "You let her think we were married," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "Seemed simpler than explaining the truth," Lucas replied, which was perfectly reasonable but did not explain the strange flutter in Cassandra's stomach at the thought of being married to him. "Did it bother you?" "No," she said honestly, and then, more softly, "it did not bother me at all." Lucas looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in the air between them, a tension that had been building since the moment he first lifted her to drink from his canteen. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of her dark hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek for just a moment before he withdrew. "Cassandra," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." "What?" Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "These past 2 weeks, traveling with you, talking to you every night by the fire, watching you get stronger and seeing you smile again." He paused, seeming to struggle for words. "I have never felt this way about anyone before. I know the circumstances are not ideal, and I know you are still recovering from everything you went through, and I swear I am not trying to take advantage. But I need you to know that I have feelings for you. Real feelings." Cassandra felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were good tears, tears of relief and joy. "Lucas, I have feelings for you too. I think I have since that first day when you were so gentle giving me water when you worked so hard to break those chains. You saved my life, but more than that, you made me believe that good people still exist in this world." Lucas smiled, that transformative smile that she had come to treasure, and took her hand carefully, mindful of her still healing wrists. "So what do we do about this?" he asked. "We keep going to Angel's camp," Cassandra said decisively. "I need to see my aunt to let her know I am alive and safe, but after that—" She squeezed his hand. "After that, if you still want to find a place to settle, maybe we could do that together." "I would like that," Lucas said softly, and then he leaned forward and kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Cassandra kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling his heart beating as fast as her own. They continued their journey with a new understanding between them. No longer just a cowboy helping a woman in distress, but 2 people building something together. They talked about the future, about the kind of life they might build in California, about the small ranch Lucas had always dreamed of owning, about the children Cassandra hoped to have someday, growing up free and happy under open skies. The landscape changed as they traveled north, the harsh desert giving way to rolling hills, and then to the dramatic mountains of the Sierra Nevada. The air grew cooler and smelled of pine instead of sage, and Cassandra felt her spirits lift with every mile that separated her from that terrible place where she had nearly died. Angel's Camp turned out to be a bustling mining town in the Sierra foothills, built during the gold rush and still prospering from the mines that honeycombed the surrounding mountains. Lucas and Cassandra rode down the main street, past saloons and mercantiles and stamp mills that thundered day and night, crushing ore from the mines. Cassandra asked directions to her aunt's address, and they found the house on the edge of town, a neat cabin with a vegetable garden and chickens scratching in the yard. Martha Nelson was a sturdy woman in her 50s who opened the door with a suspicious frown that transformed into shock and then joy when she recognized her niece. "Cassandra, Lord have mercy, child. I thought you were still in St. Louis. Come in immediately." Over tea and fresh bread, Cassandra told her aunt an abbreviated version of the story about her father's death and the difficulties she had encountered traveling to California, but emphasizing Lucas's heroic rescue and constant protection. Martha studied Lucas with shrewd eyes that missed nothing, noting the way his gaze kept returning to Cassandra, the protective way he stayed close to her even in the safety of the cabin. "You are planning to marry my niece," Martha said bluntly, and it was not a question. Lucas met her eyes steadily. "If she will have me, yes, madam, but I wanted to speak with you first, seeing as you are her only family. Do you love her?" "Yes, madam, more than I have ever loved anyone or anything." "Can you provide for her, support her properly?" "I have money saved from 7 years of steady work," Lucas said. "Enough to buy land and stock it. I am a hard worker and I know ranching. I will never be rich, but she will never go hungry or want for anything I can provide." Martha looked at Cassandra. "And you, girl, do you love this cowboy?" Cassandra reached for Lucas's hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I do, Aunt Martha, with all my heart." Martha's stern expression softened into a smile. "Then you have my blessing for what it is worth, but you will stay here for a proper wedding. I will not have people saying my niece got married in some rushed ceremony without family present." They stayed in Angel's camp for 3 weeks while Martha organized a wedding that gradually took on proportions far beyond what Lucas and Cassandra had envisioned. Martha seemed to know everyone in town, and she was determined that her niece would have a proper celebration. She recruited the minister, enlisted the hotel owner to host the reception, and mobilized half the women in town to cook and bake. During those weeks, Lucas found work at a nearby ranch, impressing the owner with his skill handling difficult horses. The owner, a weathered rancher named Tom Morrison, mentioned that his neighbor was selling 160 acres of good land with water access and a small cabin already built, and Lucas rode out to look at it with Tom's recommendation. The property was everything he had dreamed of: rolling meadows backed by pine-covered hills, with a clear creek running through and enough flat land for grazing and future expansion. The cabin needed work but had good bones: 2 rooms with a stone fireplace and a covered porch that looked out over the most beautiful view Lucas had ever seen. He made an offer that same day, and the owner, eager to move back east to be near his daughter, accepted. Lucas returned to Angel's camp that evening and found Cassandra helping her aunt prepare dinner. He caught her hand and pulled her outside, his eyes bright with excitement. "Come with me," he said. "I want to show you something." They rode out together in the long, golden light of evening, and when they crested the last hill and Cassandra saw the property spread out below them, she gasped. "Lucas, it is beautiful." "It is ours," he said, dismounting and helping her down. "If you like it. I bought it this afternoon. We can build a good life here, Cassandra. Raise cattle, maybe some horses. Build onto the cabin as we need more space." He paused, suddenly uncertain. "Do you like it?" "Like it." Cassandra threw her arms around him, laughing and crying at the same time. "I love it. I love you. I love everything about this." Lucas held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the rightness of this moment settle into his bones. "I am going to make you so happy," he promised. "I swear it." "You already have," she said, and kissed him as the sun painted the sky gold and crimson and purple, a promise of the bright future stretching before them. The wedding took place on a Saturday in late September 1881, in the small church at the center of Angel's Camp. Cassandra wore a simple but beautiful dress that Martha had altered from one of her own treasured gowns, with wildflowers in her hair that Lucas had picked that morning from the meadows of their new property. Lucas wore new clothes purchased for the occasion, feeling slightly uncomfortable in the formal attire, but willing to endure anything to make Cassandra happy. The church was packed with townspeople, many of whom had never met the bride and groom but came anyway because Martha had invited them, and because weddings were always cause for celebration in a mining town where good news was treasured. Tom Morrison stood up as Lucas's best man, having taken a paternal interest in the young cowboy, and Martha dabbed at her eyes throughout the ceremony, overwhelmed with happiness that her niece had found such obvious love after so much hardship. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Lucas kissed his bride, the church erupted in applause and cheering. The reception at the hotel lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and more food than Lucas had seen in years. He danced with Cassandra again and again, holding her close and marveling at how his life had changed in just 2 months, how finding her chained and dying in the desert had led to this moment of perfect happiness. "What are you thinking?" Cassandra asked, her head resting on his shoulder as they swayed to a waltz played slightly off-key by the town's amateur musicians. "That I am the luckiest man alive," Lucas said honestly. "That I would ride through 1,000 deserts if it meant finding you at the end." "You will make me cry again," she said, but she was smiling, radiantly happy. They spent their wedding night at the hotel, in the nicest room Martha had insisted on paying for, and if Lucas was nervous about being with a woman for the first time in any meaningful way, Cassandra's gentle patience and obvious love made everything feel natural and right. They held each other through the night, whispering plans and dreams and promises, building the foundation of their marriage with words and touch and absolute trust. The next morning, they rode out to their property together, ready to begin their new life. The cabin was small and needed considerable work, but they attacked the problems with enthusiasm, scrubbing and repairing and gradually transforming the rough shelter into a home. Lucas built new furniture and mended the roof, while Cassandra sewed curtains and planted a garden, drawing on memories of her aunt's thriving vegetables. Tom Morrison proved a good neighbor and friend, helping Lucas select cattle to stock the property and offering advice earned through 30 years of ranching in California. Other neighbors gradually appeared, ranchers and farmers who had heard about the young couple and came to introduce themselves and offer assistance. The community welcomed them warmly, and Lucas and Cassandra found themselves building not just a ranch but a real place in the world, surrounded by friends and purpose. The first winter was challenging, colder than either of them had expected, and they spent long evenings huddled by the fireplace, Lucas reading aloud from the few books they owned while Cassandra worked on her endless sewing projects. But the challenges only brought them closer, teaching them to rely on each other completely, to work as a team in everything from feeding cattle in snowstorms to stretching their supplies through the long months when they could not easily get to town. Spring arrived like a benediction, and with it the news that Cassandra was pregnant. She told Lucas one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and he reacted with such pure joy that she laughed through her tears, letting him spin her around carefully before insisting she sit down so he could make sure she was comfortable. "I am going to be a father," he kept saying, wonder in his voice, and Cassandra loved him even more for his unguarded happiness. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Cassandra found the summer heat oppressive in her condition. Lucas hovered protectively, doing every heavy task and insisting she rest frequently. Martha visited often, bringing supplies and advice and her own special brand of gruff affection, making sure her niece had everything she needed. Their son was born on a crisp October morning in 1882, delivered by the midwife from Angel's Camp with Martha and Lucas in attendance. Lucas held Cassandra's hand through the whole ordeal, whispering encouragement and love, and when he finally held his son for the first time, tears ran unashamedly down his weathered face. They named him James, after Lucas's father, and from the first day he proved to have his father's blue eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. Lucas adapted to fatherhood with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else, learning to change diapers and soothe a crying infant with surprising skill. Cassandra watched him walk the floor at night with James sleeping against his shoulder and fell in love with him all over again, seeing the gentle strength that had first drawn her to him expressed now in his devotion to their son. The ranch prospered over the next few years. Lucas proved as skilled at breeding and raising cattle as he was at everything else related to ranching, and their herd grew steadily. He hired on a young cowhand named Billy to help with the heavy work, a good-natured kid from Texas who treated Lucas like an older brother and was bashfully polite around Cassandra. Their daughter Sarah was born in the summer of 1884, a tiny, fierce thing who had her mother's dark hair and her father's stubborn chin. James, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and appointed himself her protector, a role he took very seriously. Lucas built an addition onto the cabin, adding 2 more rooms so the children could have their own space as they grew, and Cassandra filled the house with love and laughter and the countless small touches that transformed a structure into a home. They faced challenges, of course. A harsh winter in 1885 when they lost some cattle to disease, a fire that burned part of the barn and had to be rebuilt, the normal struggles of ranch life in an unforgiving landscape. But they faced everything together, Lucas and Cassandra, partners in every sense of the word, their love deepening with each shared hardship and triumph. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Lucas took Cassandra back to the hilltop where he had first shown her the property. The children were spending the night with Martha in town, and Lucas and Cassandra had the rare luxury of time alone together. They sat on a blanket watching the stars emerge, the same stars that had witnessed their first conversations around a campfire in the Arizona desert. "Do you remember what you said to me that night in Ehrenberg?" Cassandra asked, leaning against Lucas's shoulder. "On the boarding house porch. I told you I had feelings for you," Lucas said, his arm around her waist. "Real feelings." "I remember being so scared and so happy at the same time," Cassandra said softly. "Scared because I had been hurt so badly, happy because I knew you were different, that you would never hurt me." "Never," Lucas promised, as he had promised 1,000 times before. "I love you, Cassandra. More today than yesterday, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." "That is impossible," she said, smiling, "because I already love you more than words can say." They made love under the stars that night, celebrating the years behind them and the years still to come, and Lucas thought about that day in the desert when he had found her chained to the wagon wheel. How his life had changed in that single moment of choosing to stop, to help, to care. He had broken the lock and burned the chains to ash, freeing her from that immediate danger. But she had freed him from something far more profound, the loneliness and aimlessness that had defined his existence before her. The years continued to roll past in a steady rhythm of seasons and cycles, planting and harvest, birth and growth. Another son arrived in 1887, named Thomas for the neighbor who had been such a good friend. Lucas taught James and Sarah to ride almost as soon as they could walk, and the children grew up strong and capable, inheriting their father's way with animals and their mother's quick mind. Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1890, surrounded by the family she had helped bring together. They buried her in the Angels Camp Cemetery with half the town in attendance, and Cassandra grieved deeply for the aunt who had taken her in and given her blessing to the marriage that had changed her life. But she found comfort in Lucas and the children, in the strong foundation of love and family that Martha had helped them build. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Lucas bought adjoining land when it became available, expanding their holdings until they had one of the largest and most successful operations in the area. He remained humble and hardworking despite his success, still rising before dawn to check on the cattle, still spending long days in the saddle doing the hard physical work of ranching alongside his hired hands. Cassandra kept the books and managed the business side of the ranch with the same skill she had once brought to her father's bank, proving invaluable in negotiations and planning. They made a formidable team, respected throughout the region for their integrity and fair dealing, known for helping neighbors in difficulty and contributing to the community that had welcomed them. In the spring of 1895, as they prepared to celebrate their 14th wedding anniversary, Lucas came in from the range to find Cassandra sitting on the porch watching James, now 12, teaching Thomas, 8, how to throw a rope. Sarah, nearly 11, was in the garden with a book, preferring reading to roping but just as beloved for her different interests. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, settling onto the porch step beside his wife. "How far we have come," Cassandra said, taking his hand. "How different my life could have been if you had ridden past that day instead of stopping." She shuddered slightly, even after all these years unable to completely forget those terrible days chained in the desert. "I could never have ridden past you," Lucas said seriously. "Even before I knew you, even when you were just a stranger in trouble, I had to stop. That is not who I am." "I know," Cassandra said, squeezing his hand. "That is why I love you, because you are exactly who you are, good and true and constant as the sunrise." Lucas smiled and pulled her closer, and they sat together watching their children play in the golden afternoon light, knowing themselves blessed beyond measure. The chains that had once bound Cassandra had been burned to ash 15 years ago in an Arizona desert, but the bonds that held her and Lucas together, bonds forged through hardship and strengthened by love, would endure forever, unbreakable and true. Their youngest child, a daughter they named Martha in honor of Cassandra's aunt, was born later that year, a surprise addition to the family that brought renewed joy and energy to the household. James and Sarah doted on their baby sister, and Thomas appointed himself her guardian with the same seriousness James had shown with Sarah years before. Lucas, now 40, had gray threading through his dark hair and lines earned from years of sun and wind etched deep around his eyes. But Cassandra thought him more handsome than ever, his face showing the character of a life well lived. She was 36, her dark hair still thick and lustrous, her figure showing the evidence of 4 pregnancies but her eyes bright with contentment and joy. They stood together one autumn evening in 1896, watching the sun set over the ranch that had started as a dream and become their reality. The cattle grazed peacefully in the meadows, the children were safe and healthy inside the house they had built together, and the future stretched before them bright with promise. "If I could go back and do it all again," Lucas said suddenly, "I would not change a single thing. Not one moment, not one choice." "Neither would I," Cassandra agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder. Even the terrible parts, because they brought me to you." Lucas turned to face her, cupping her face in his weathered hands, looking at her with the same wonder and love he had shown that first night he told her he had feelings for her. "You are my life, Cassandra Mitchell. You and the children and this ranch we built together. You are everything I ever wanted and things I never even knew to dream about. And you are mine," she said softly, tears of happiness shining in her eyes. "My cowboy who broke the chains and set me free, who gave me a life more beautiful than I ever imagined possible." They kissed as the last light faded from the western sky. Two people who had found each other in the harshest circumstances and built something enduring and true. The desert had tried to take everything from Cassandra, but Lucas had given her back her life and added to it more love, more joy, more meaning than she had ever thought possible. Inside the house, the children called for their parents, and Lucas and Cassandra walked hand in hand back to the warm light and laughter of their home, back to the life they had created together from ash and determination, and love that would never fade. The chains were long gone, burned to nothing in a desert fire, but the freedom they represented endured in every moment of the life they lived, in every child they raised, in every sunrise they greeted together. The ranch would continue to thrive for decades, passing eventually to James and then to his children, each generation adding their own story to the legacy that began the day a cowboy chose to stop for a woman chained to a wagon wheel in the Arizona desert. But the heart of that legacy was always the same, the simple truth that love could transform even the darkest circumstances into light, that two people who chose each other against all odds could build something lasting and beautiful and utterly worth every hardship endured to achieve it. Lucas and Cassandra grew old together on that California ranch, watching their children grow and marry and have children of their own, watching the world change around them while the constants remained, the land and the sky and the love that had sustained them from the beginning. They held hands through all of it, partners and lovers and best friends, their bond unbreakable from the day he first gave her water in the desert until the day, many decades later, when they passed within hours of each other, neither willing to continue in a world without the other. But that was far in the future. In the autumn of 1896, they were still young and strong, their children healthy and thriving, their ranch prosperous, their love as fresh and powerful as it had been that first night when Lucas confessed his feelings and Cassandra admitted she felt the same. They had everything that mattered, and they knew it, treasuring each day as the gift it was, grateful beyond words for the chance encounter that had changed both their lives forever. The story that had begun in chains and desperation had become a story of freedom and hope and enduring love, proof that even in the harsh landscape of the Wild West, beauty could bloom in the most unlikely places, and that sometimes the worst circumstances could lead to the very best outcomes. Lucas had burned those chains to ash, but from those ashes had risen something far more precious, a love that would endure through every trial, every joy, every moment of the long and blessed life they built together in the California foothills, surrounded by family and purpose, and the kind of happiness that comes from choosing to love completely and being loved the same way in return.